is only found in the cosmos.
Aurelion Sol's rework has officially been released. Before this rework, Aurelion Sol had one of the lowest pick rates in the entire game. Now he has a 75% pick and ban rate. It's no surprise that this champion has become so popular. Thematically, he feels like a true dragon with his laser breath, and his new ult makes you feel like someone that can bend galaxies. We've all seen these clips of Sol having 1,000 stacks and one-shotting the entire map. But what's actually realistic in a game? How many stacks can you actually get? Aurelion Sol was designed to have 300 to 500 stacks by the end of an average League of Legends game. So what makes a good Sol player a great one? Today we look at the top Aurelion Sol players in NA, EU, and Korea, and to show you exactly what they're doing to dominate their games. This is how to play like a challenger. Aurelion Sol is one of those champions that's so broken he demands nerfs. Riot's aware of this, and so they've been slowly nerfing Aurelion Sol every single patch. Even though he's extremely broken, it's hard to keep up with all these changes. The Porofessor app allows you to keep up with all of these changes extremely easily thanks to their patch notes page. That way you know exactly what has been done to your main champions, other champions, and even the items that everyone uses so that you know whether or not you're weaker or stronger. Whether it's builds, win rates, or replays, Porofessor has the best and most easily accessible information you want for all of your needs. You can download Porofessor today with my link in the description. Let's begin with Aurelion Sol's identity. Aurelion Sol scales differently than other hypercarry mages like Vladimir or Kassadin. While those two champions rely primarily on their levels and items for power, Aurelion Sol is built on a combination of things. The most unique one would be his stacks of Stardust, which he gets by being in combat and farming minions with his E. Here's a fact of reality. Aurelion Sol is not as broken as Vladimir or Kassadin in the late game. While he's certainly one of the best champions that you can have on your team in a 40-minute scenario, a fed Sol cannot exactly 1 vs 5 a team like a Vladimir or Kassadin can. Sol is extremely good at a few different things. He's one of the best choke point controllers in the entire game. A combination of his E and ultimate will stop any team in their tracks by himself during an engage. But what he doesn't have like Vlad or Kassadin does is speed in his combos. While Kassadin and Vladimir can one-shot you in the blink of an eye, Aurelion Sol still requires some support from his team to be able to completely destroy the enemy team. Sol is really good at a bunch of different things, from roaming and side laning, to being able to take on tanks and bruisers by himself because his Q deals percentage HP. There are very few roles of a mage that Aurelion Sol cannot fulfill. But Sol's biggest weakness? Well, it's the same as any hyperscaling champion, his early game. Aurelion Sol's biggest problem in the early game is how little mana you actually have. If Aurelion Sol had unlimited mana, then he would actually be a very strong early laner. Your Q allows you to 1v1 most mid laners that just run at you, your W resets your Q that allows you to pretty much consistently be dealing damage, and your E plus Q gives you pretty good wave clear. But the problem is that you just run out of mana too quickly to be able to actually kill anyone. Most really good Aurelion Sol players will try to trade somewhat evenly in the early game, then back to TP for their Tear of the Goddess as soon as possible. Here's the worst part of Aurelion Sol, level 3 to level 9. At level 3, you can actually go evenly with most mid laners at this stage. The problem is, after level 3 to level 9, you're not really getting any more stronger. While other people are maxing their Q abilities or getting their ultimates online, Sol doesn't really get much stronger with points into his Q. The problem with his Q is the same, it's too mana hungry to really be able to get any more potential out of it. Not only that, the Q scales off of levels as well, so it has more room to grow as an ability. Your ultimate requires you to have 75 Stardust before you can drop the really big one down, and it doesn't really do much damage at this stage in the game. Most Aurelion Sols will usually wait until level 9 or level 10 if there aren't any fights in their lane. This is around the time that they're actually able to collect enough Stardust to be able to drop the big one down for a dragon fight or a Rift Herald. There's also a fundamental build difference between Korea and the rest of the world. In Korea, high elo mid laners are guaranteed to get their blue buff every single game no matter what. So usually they'll actually go for Blasting Wand into Rod of Ages instead. The extra ability power from Blasting Wand helps them one-shot the wave faster, so they don't need the extra mana from Tear since they always get blue buff. Aurelion Sol players in North America and EU, who know that they're not guaranteed blue buff every single game, lean more towards Liandry's and Tear of the Goddess so that they can actually stay in fights with their high mana costs. Liandry also importantly gives you cooldown reduction, which allows you to farm with your E more often so you can get more stacks. Unlike other scaling mages, instead of farming a wave as quickly as possible so you can run to the next wave, you only want to farm your wave on Aurelion Sol when you have your E active so you can actually get the stacks. This unfortunately means that you're not able to rotate towards fights or manipulate waves as freely as other hypercarries. Having Minion Dematerializer helps you a lot in the early game to be able to one-shot the wave so you can go participate in fights. Remember that in the early game, getting Stardust is not more important than getting damage on your enemy laner. You just don't have enough mana or damage to be able to farm the entire minion wave and get enough Stardust to make a big difference. Getting to that 75 Stardust is really important for your ultimate so that you can have a really good tool for a first team fight. It's not more important than staying in the lane and just soaking XP to slowly scale. You can turn on Aesol's Q on and off really quickly to proc Mana Flow Band and Comet for a little bit of periodic poke to get small advantages here and there in the lane. While melee champions that are not extremely mobile are a lot easier to kill, for the most part you're going to run out of mana on Aurelion Sol before you can actually kill them. Every champion in the game can run sidesteps to be able to dodge your Q for a short period of time. For the most part, you just want to sit back, farm, stay safe until your mid-game spikes. Aurelion Sol's first power spike is around level 9. That's when his Q has an infinite cast time and his mana pool becomes large enough that he can actually support this ability. You want to be doing two things in the mid-game: farming more stacks and making sure that you roam around to be able to support your team. If you're not getting stacks on Aesol, you're not scaling as hard, and it's much easier to get stacks fighting than it is farming. Your W is a really good tool to get into angles that most other champions would not be able to approach from. Don't be afraid of flying into a fight, blowing up someone who's low HP, and just flying out. Aurelion Sol's best point is when everybody is running away and he's flying towards them to try and get more resets. His biggest single strength, however, is holding those choke points. His E is powerful enough that it could be considered a wall, so much so that if you got into position for a jungle choke point before a fight, you could basically hold off an entire enemy team just by stalling it out with your E and ultimate. In the mid game, you're just trying to stay alive for as long as possible, pump out as much damage as you can, and try to stay alive for the end of a team fight because that's when you can fly in, get your resets, and clean up everyone as quickly as possible. So when does Aurelion Sol really become broken? When does he start to hit his late game stride? If there's one core item on Aurelion Sol, it would absolutely be Rylai's Crystal Scepter. This is an item that every single Aurelion Sol buys in every single game, regardless of whatever they have, regardless of their playstyle, and regardless of the enemy team. It allows you to laser people for longer, and it gives you an easier time to be able to hit your E plus ultimate combo. You should have this item around level 11 to 13, and this is when you really start taking over the game as Aurelion Sol. Aesol is very good at side laning, but also very good at 1v1s. Since his Q has almost no cooldown, you can actually 1v1 bruisers if they're not really fed. The biggest mechanical difference between good Aesols and great ones is how they use their W and Q to kite. When you're firing off your Q, your movement speed on Aurelion Sol is halved. So when you're just flying normally without Q, you're actually going faster than most normal champions. By toggling your Q on and off, you can constantly be kiting someone while dealing a lot of damage to them. And remembering to do this properly and doing it well is the difference between whether or not you get a kill or you get killed yourself. The best approach with W in a teamfight to maximize damage is often going to be slightly horizontal. If you fly directly away from the enemies, you're not going to be in range. If you fly straight at them, you'll be in melee range and you'll get blown up. Horizontally keeps you about the same distance for a long enough time that you'll be able to do a lot of damage and not be in a very dangerous position. Better yet, if you're in terrain, melee champions will have a harder time approaching you because you're going to be inside a wall or a tree. Remember that though Aurelion Sol scales really well, he does still need help from his teammates. His Q takes time to charge through, his ult takes time to come down. Aurelion Sol is essentially like a machine gun. He will constantly be pumping out damage, but he needs to be protected. Aesol in a team fight will outdamage pretty much every single other champion in the game so long as he stays alive, which is why you need your team to be able to support you. The best thing about Aurelion Sol is you can play any single role in a team fight. You can engage with your E plus ultimate, you can backline, you can even assassinate with your W since it gets resets off kills. Whatever you're going to be doing, you're going to be dealing a lot of damage, and you're going to be inevitably useful in all of these team fights. Aurelion Sol might not be the most broken champion in a 40-minute situation, but he is one of the best. Due to the fact that his scaling also relies on Stardust, if you're in a scenario where you just didn't have a lot of late game teamfights, you're gonna be finding yourself weaker than most other hyper carries in the game. But when it comes to Aurelion Sol, there is no champion in the game that has such wide AoE attacks. His E-Alt combo can hold off an entire team by himself. And when you really land a big ultimate on an entire team, then it really does feel like you're controlling the entire world. If you want to be completely fucking useless for 15 minutes and completely overpowered after 30, then Sol is the champion for you.